And welcome to another edition of Crown Gridiron Nation, everyone. There is Gord on the coast, Deshaun's in the Big Smoke, and I'm here on Football Island, ready to bring you another edition of the 2-Minute Offense. Keelan White had a couple of catches and a TD for Montana, but Nolan Ulm was kept off the sheet on the opposite side for Eastern Washington in the Grizzlies' wipeout of the Eagles. What an implosion for the Syracuse Orange over the last few weeks. Damian Alford did chip in with 2 catches for 23 yards against Florida State. Theo Johnson has found his groove. Once again, the leader in receiving yards as Penn State blanks Maryland. What a stat line for Tavius Robinson for Ole Miss. The kid from Guelph with 3 tackles, a pass defense, quarterback hurry, half a sack, and a forced fumble. Man, what a day, but it still wasn't enough against that Crimson Tide. Malik Straker with a monster day, 12 tackles, a half TFL as A-State squeaks by UMass. After a couple of games over the century mark, Jared Wayne had a quiet day. He didn't need to be allowed. 2 catches for 40 yards in Pitt's 30-point win over Virginia. The streak of 100-yard games comes to a close for Chase Brown. He was so close, 98 yards on 23 carries, but he did find the promised land twice. Twin brother Sidney with 7 tackles for Illinois. 8-1 Liberty comes to town, and UConn takes them out and gets bowl qualification. Kevin Clarcius with 2 receptions for 28 yards and a big tutty, and they're going crazy baby bonzo in Husky land. A good news, bad news day for Ohio. Yes, with a win against Ball State, they are the Western Division champions of the MAC. However, the bad news, while Curtis Rourke was on a tear in the first half, there might be a tear in that knee. He is listed as questionable for next week. Simple question, Gord. Chase Brown, he's carried the ball a whole lot and a whole lot more than the rest of his competitors. Can he hang on to the NCAA rushing title?
You know, I think it's about 50-50 at this point in time. He does have the lead, and he has for a number of weeks, but he's starting to slow down ever so slightly, and his lead has trimmed to just 35 yards overall now. And in fact, if you go by rushing yards per game, he's actually second by a margin of about 15 yards per game to a runner from UAB. So there are some other runners lurking. Blake Corum at Michigan, for example, a guy he's matching up against this week. That'll be a great matchup. We'll talk about it a little bit more later on. He's right in that picture too, but I think Chase Brown's got a good shot. I just don't think it looks like anywhere near as much of a slam dunk as it did a couple weeks ago at this point in time, with a couple runners lurking, and one in particular who's been more efficient on a per game basis than he has.
I'm going to have to agree with Gord. I think it's 50-50, but I hope he can claim the rushing title. You look at his stats right now, 280 carries, over 1,400 yards, 7 touchdowns. He has been slowing down over the last couple games. Recent game, he had only 98 yards, but he also had 2 touchdowns on 23 rushing attempts. But I think it would be a great statement to have a Canadian running back claim the NCAA rushing title. So I'm hoping that he can claim the rushing title.
We talk a lot on this show about guys from Canada in the NCAA going into the NFL draft, but one of the reasons that we do this show is that a lot of the guys go straight into the CFL. Deshaun, who is your pick right now for the best possible NCAA player that will go directly into the CFL next year?
I'm going to dig into my youth sports background here, and I'm going to look at Tavius Robinson from Ole Miss, 6'6" linebacker, defensive lineman from Guelph, Ontario. He had a stint with the Guelph Griffins a couple years ago. He was a big piece of their defensive line, helping them get to a Yates Cup, and then he was able to transfer over to Ole Miss during the COVID year. And you know what? He's had pretty solid production for them this year. He's at 30 total tackles, 10 solo tackles, 4 sacks, 4 forced fumbles, 1 fumble recovery. I like his size, I like his length, and I like the body that he carries with him. He's the modern day defensive lineman, and he's a physical specimen. So he might get some NFL attention, but I hope we can see him come up north to the CFL.
Well, it's a top week for football in Canada with national semifinals in the Grey Cup, but who would be the top Canadians this past week in the NCAA in our Stateside 5? In at 5, it is Windsor's Theo Johnson, who led all Penn State receivers in yards in a shutout victory over the Terrapins. A Straight's Malik Straker, hailing from Ottawa, is a tackle machine and even doesn't this time, and he shared a TFL. Chase Brown's streak of 10 100-yard games was stopped just 2 yards short, but the workhorse from London, Ontario still leads the NCAA in rushing. Go back to the start of last week, and Curtis Rourke's performance against Miami of Ohio was stellar, both in the air and on the ground, and kept Ohio at the top of the MAC East. And Guelph's Tavius Robinson tops the five for the first time this year. What a line. 3 tackles, a shared TFL and sack, a forced fumble, a pass breakup, and a quarterback hurry at Ole Miss. Coming up, we recap Conference Championship Saturday across the home and native. Welcome back, everyone. Didn't get a chance to see the conference finals from across the country? Now's your chance in our 3-minute warning. Dunsmore Cup, Carabins and the Rouge et Or. First major for the home side, and Arnaud Desjardins connects with Kevin Mattel. We'll hear that a little more later. It is 10-1 RNO. Montreal replies 15 minutes later, also from 8 yards out. Hassan Dosso from Jonathan Senecal. It's 11-10, Carabin at the poutine break. Mid-third, it's Desjardins again, finding Mattel. Long distance this time, 50 yards to pay dirt. Laval is back up 17-14. End of the third, and it is a breakdown on special teams. This Blanchard punt is blocked by Philippe Cardinal. Julien Legahenec ports it to La Maison, and Montreal is back up by 4. 3 minutes left. It's Mattel again for his third touche. Laval leads 24-21, and Montreal comes back and ties this up again, this time at 24. Philippe Boyer, 39 yards out with 40 clicks left on the clock. That sets up this unbelievable final play. Blanchard from 48 yards out, and it is wide. Carl Shabbat tries to run it out, and he is blown up by his lead blocker. It is a walk-off Rouge, ladies and gentlemen. Laval is off to the national semifinal. An easier story to tell at the 114th Yates Cup, Queens at Western. Western piled up the points while Mother Nature did the same with the snow. It was 30-7 Western by the third quarter, in part to 2 Keanu Yazbek touchdown runs. But the star of the show was Keon Edwards, 24 carries, 260 yards, and the game's closing touchdown. Needless to say, Edwards took home the Dalt White Trophy for the MVP, and to the surprise of a very few, Western will host the Mitchell Bowl on Saturday. Saskatchewan hosting UBC in the Hardy Cup. It was a cold day in Saskatoon for the Canada West Final with a wind chill of around minus 25. And this game was not really an oil painting as a result. The Huskies added to their lead 3 points at a time in the first half. However, the T-Birds warmed up in the last minute, finishing a drive with Lucas Mastrodomenico punching it in from 1 yard out, and it was 9-7 Saskatchewan heading in to the frostbite treatment break. UBC would take a single on a missed field goal, make it a 1-point game in the third, but to close that quarter, quarterback Mason Nias engineered a 14-play, 67-yard drive, capped by a Jordan Rusnick 8-yard reception, and it was Saskatchewan up 16-8. The icing on the cake would be Finn Marcotte Cribb and his pick six, and the guys from Saskatoon can warm up, then book a flight down east for the Uteck Bowl. The Loney Bowl for the AUS Championship, underdog Mount Allison at undefeated St. FX, and the offenses were in sleep mode in the first half, so it was up to special teams to put a TD on the board, and Ben Harrington does just that with his 94-yard return to the house. It was 12-2 for the X-Men at the break. To the fourth we go. Conference MVP Malcolm Bussey opens up a big lane, a 30-yard romp to the blue turf, and X is in control with the 21-5 lead. Mount A showed some life on offense finally. Cody Barton hauls in a 19-yard pass from Justin Vogels, and that would leave the Mounties 7 points and $1 short. The X-Men will host the Uteck Bowl. Well, we're going to do previews next segment, but I want to know what your takeaways are from these conference finals, and I'm going to start with Deshaun.
I want to take a moment to talk about the defending Yates Cup champion Western Mustangs. A lot of attention has been around their running game this season, but I really want to focus on the fact that they might realistically have one of the greatest ground attacks that we've ever seen in youth sports football. Obviously, they're led by Keon Edwards, the newly crowned OUA MVP, who had 260 rushing yards this past weekend and one touchdown. But the depth that they have at the running back position is elite. At the second string running back, they have Edward Winati, who didn't play this past weekend, but he finished as a top 5 rusher in the nation. At the third string running back, they have Keanu Yazbek, a second-year kid from Champlain, who can start on any OUA team. And at fourth string, they have Troy Thompson, a fifth-year senior, who can also start on any given team in the OUA. So when you look at the Western Mustangs and the rushing attack that they have, realistically, the elite depth that they're equipped with, this might be one of the greatest rushing attacks that we've ever seen in youth sports football.
Well, and this is not a new trend for Western, right? We're going on well over a decade now of Western just consistently having an elite rushing attack, and the credit does need to go to recruiting. They've clearly recruited excellent talent at that position, but the credit also needs to go to scheme. And they've also recruited excellent talent on the offensive line, I should point out too. But if you look at Western on film, they consistently, creatively scheme up creases in the running game and different looks and wallpaper on their rushing attack that makes it really difficult to stop. I can guarantee you Queens was talking all week about shutting down the Western rushing attack, and the results of that focus from one of the best defenses in the OUA, 260 rushing yards for Keon Edwards. That's more than just a player excelling and not to take anything away from Edwards, but as we've seen, the face can change and the machine still keeps rolling on. With regards to the rushing attack thing, that's going to be a key this upcoming week. And I think it was laid bare that, again, this shouldn't surprise too many people, but when you hit this time of year, you know, the white stuff starts coming down, the field surface is slick, it hurts to catch footballs. It becomes about the rushing attack, and it's no coincidence that the best rushing teams in the country are the ones, or at least the best rushing teams last weekend, are the ones that got through. We talked about UBC in the Hardy Cup, for example, needing to be able to rely on that ground attack and feeling like they could run on anybody going into Saskatchewan. Well, that turned into just 85 yards rushing, and as a result, that UBC attack was kneecapped. So that's going to be a continuing trend, is who can be successful on the ground when the weather is cold like it is now.
And since we're focusing on the Western Mustangs, I want to touch on their opponents in the Mitchell Bowl in the Laval Rouge et Or. And I want to touch specifically on receiver Kevin Matau, who is also the newly crowned RCQ MVP. Last week in the Dunsmore Cup against the Montreal Caravans, he had 9 receptions, 116 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He was dominant. He was unstoppable. He played hero ball, and he put his team on his back and carried them to a conference championship. He proved why not only he is the RCQ MVP, but he also proved why he is the best receiver right now in Canadian university football. This is a young man who spent some time back at Syracuse before coming back to the North and going to Laval, and he's only in his second year of eligibility. So I'm excited to see how his career pans out. But this upcoming weekend, I'm excited to see how Western's defense can react to Matau, if they can shut him down, or if he can put a stamp on proving that he is the top receiver in Canadian university football.
Well, and I'll wrap this segment with an AUS thought, and I'm starting to wonder if there might be anybody within the St. FX football program that might be interested in leaving the AUS sometime soon. We've talked at length on this show a couple of times about whether Western's going to be challenged enough in the OUA before they get to the national level, and if all these lopsided wins that Western has are a testament that they may be ripe for a surprise when it gets to the national semifinal level. Well, St. FX looks every bit the part so far this season of a legitimate national title contender. They've rolled through undefeated through their schedule. There have been some tight games for sure, but they have rarely looked overly stressed on the field. The challenge is that we all have seen in recent years how the rest of the AUS tends to stack up to the rest of the country. And the huge step up for them this week is going to be to step up to play the Saskatchewan Huskies. The Saskatchewan Huskies, who were this close to winning a Vanier Cup title last year and who look every bit the part of a national title contender themselves in a much stronger conference from top to bottom. And so I wonder if there are some people in the St. FX program, say Gary Waterman, who just cruised to, I think it's his 4th straight AUS Coach of the Year title, that may be starting to go, hey, maybe we need to start playing out of the conference at least once, maybe bring back some interlocks, something like that, so that we can't just go through playing a AAA schedule and then all of a sudden end up in the World Series against the big league boys and try to compete.
And Gord, to that point, I think that's a very good point. You look at the St. FX team this year, they had 13 conference all-stars. They had the coach of the year in Gary Waterman. They had the rookie of the year in Zachary, who is the receiver. They have the lineman of the year in Alex Fetchin, and they have the most valuable player of the conference in Malcolm Bussey. So if you're looking at the dominance that they've had over that conference, it's by a wide margin. They have the number one offense in the conference, number one defense in the conference. The list goes on. I think at this point, we need to see those out of conference matchups. We need to see how some of these more dominant AUS teams, when they come and go, how they fare against teams from other conferences, aside from just waiting until a national semifinal. I totally agree with you there.
Coming up, we look forward to the national semifinals. CJFL Canadian Bowl at Mosaic Stadium in Regina. The home side, Regina Thunder, they are a big favorite, playing host to the BCFC champion Okanagan Sun in a battle of the undefeated. And the Thunder start this one out hotter than a stolen pistol. First, Ryland Likert with a 2-yard run. Then, 3 minutes later, it's Carter Shuchuk capping off a drive with a 6-yard run of his own to the promised land. It is 15-0 Regina, but the sun would start to rise in the dying seconds of the first half. Check out this Michael O'Shea reception that would give you a double take. That leads to this on the final play of the half. Dominic Britton's pass is somehow corralled by Colby Mileto. Does a Moss there. 15-7 at the half. But there is more from the Colonans in the third. Javon Garwood with a 53-yard romp to the end zone. Then a 24-yard reception by Michael O'Shea. Yes, he's his son. And the Sun would not surrender the lead. For the first time in 22 years, the Okanagan Sun are your CJFL champions. So it was a significant upset in the Canadian Bowl, with Okanagan going into Regina with a wind chill of -25 and pulling that one out. Can there be a significant upset with another Western road team, this time Saskatchewan, going to X? I'm not so sure, Gord.
Well, the difference here is that it would be the home team pulling the upset. One thing I wouldn't suggest if they want to try and pull that upset is following the Suns' script of going down, was it 13 or 14 points early in that game and then having to claw back. I don't think you can count on that happening in this game if St. FX is going to be successful. One of the keys for St. FX, this was a key last week in the Hardy Cup, which was Saskatchewan versus the UBC rushing attack. We thought the UBC could really pull away. Isaiah Knight ran wild on the Saskatchewan Huskies in their last regular season matchup for over 200 yards on the ground. In the Hardy Cup, when all the chips were down, and I should say the snow was on the ground, they limited UBC's rushing attack to just 85 yards. Well, on the St. FX side, they need to be able to establish Malcolm Bussey effectively. And when we have seen AUS teams step up at this time of year and face these top-level teams, that has been the one thing that has consistently been a challenge for them on offense, is that their offensive linemen tend to be a little bit undersized compared to the Prairie Boys on the other side or the Ontario Boys on the other side. And all of a sudden, the rushing attack is no longer quite as effective. And Malcolm Bussey is the engine behind the St. FX attack. Silas Fignon, their quarterback, he's been successful this year to a relative extent, but he's only throwing for about 240 a game, which is not going to blow the doors off people. This is not the team from a number of years ago where Tavon Cook could kind of gun it out with any quarterback in the country. This is a much more balanced attack that relies on Bussey to get going. If they can't establish the run, this one's probably going to be over pretty early because they don't have a lot left in the holster, I don't think, past that. So it's going to fall on Bussey.
If the St. FX X-Men want to pull off an upset this upcoming weekend against the Saskatchewan Huskies, the question that they need to answer is whether or not they can bring anything new to the table that Saskatchewan has not seen yet this season. Saskatchewan, they went 7-1 this season, but they are extremely battle-tested. They've seen a high-powered passing attack in the Manitoba Bisons. They've seen a stern and stubborn defense in the Regina Rams, and they've seen a rampant run game in the UBC Thunderbirds. All of those scenarios, all of those obstacles they've been able to overcome. Can the St. FX X-Men bring something to the table that Saskatchewan has not seen this season and has not been able to overcome this season?
Well, let's go to the other game, the Mitchell Bowl. And this year you can't spell Rouge or without Rouge. You see what I did there? How are they going to do against Western on the road after squeaking one out against Montreal, Deshaun?
I think for both of these teams this upcoming weekend, defense is going to be what wins this game. Defense is going to be what gets you to the Vanier Cup. And both of these defenses know their assignments. If you're a defense for the Laval Rouge, or it's simple. You need to stop the run game that the Western Mustangs currently have. You need to be able to stop Keon Edwards. You need to be ready to stop Edouard Winati. You need to be ready to stop Keanu Yazbek, and you need to be ready to stop Troy Thompson if needed. You need to be able to be ready to stop one of the greatest rushing attacks that we have ever seen in youth sports football. If you are the Western Mustangs defense, it's really simple. You need to be able to stop Kevin Maital and Arnaud Desjardins. You need to force Arnaud Desjardins to throw to someone aside from the top receiver in the nation. If either of these defenses, whichever defense, can fulfill that mission, their assigned mission, then they'll be able to get to the Vanier Cup.
Yeah, and further to that point, can Laval find a way to create explosive offensive plays against a Western defense that has basically spent all season, in the secondary at least, just focusing on clamping down on big explosive plays, not allowing anybody to get over the top on them. You know, we saw they put the clamps on Richard Burton this past week against Queens. They actually did that twice this year, and that's been a theme for them pretty much all year long. That defense makes teams earn it, makes teams have to grind it out against them, and their high-powered offensive attack just pulls away. Laval, on the other hand, they still have some explosiveness on offense, but they are much more used to those grinded out games. And I think if they get into a grind fest with Western, it's not going to work out well for them. But can they create explosive, catastrophic, game-changing splash plays, whether it's on offense or maybe on special teams? I think that's going to be something Laval is going to have to create, because I do think that Western is the more well-rounded team at this point in time. I do still think it's going to be a close game, but that's going to be something to keep an eye on. Can Laval create something explosive to really rattle the Western cage a little bit, because nobody's really been able to do that effectively this season.
Coming up, our NCAA Picks of the Week. Welcome back, everyone. Time for our NCAA Games of the Week. Gord, you go first.
Illinois, having lost 2 straight after pushing themselves well into the top 25. They lose 2 straight to mediocre Big Ten teams in Michigan State and Purdue, so they need to bounce back, and this is about the worst possible spot for them to bounce back as they go into Ann Arbor in the Big House to take on the Michigan Wolverines. And as I alluded to earlier on in the show, this is Chase Brown versus Blake Corum, 2 of the top 3 rushers in the country this year. Corum in particular, pretty much a slam dunk first 2 rounds pick in the NFL draft this year. That's the matchup to watch. I don't want to forget about Sidney Brown, but the running back versus running back is pretty hard to ignore in this one.
Let's jump over to Penn State versus Rutgers. We have a Big Ten matchup with the 8-2 Penn State Nittany Lions. And I'm looking at tight end Theo Johnson from Windsor, Ontario, 6'6". He's a big boy. And he's also become one of their regular targets in that offense. 16 receptions this season, 238 receiving yards, and 2 touchdowns. He's only getting better. The NFL potential is there. I'm focused on Theo Johnson.
So for everyone on Crown Gridiron Nation, this is Jim Mullins saying, as usual, let's get out to the game.